From macro maps to micro encounters, or where do we move next? Right, at this point we've covered a lot of ground. We've seen three major theoretical responses take shape in the early 20th century: early Marxism, Structuralism, Functionalism. Three different ways of answering the same underlying question. How is social order possible? And what explains conflict, stability, and change in modern societies? And if there's one thing I want you to hold on to, it's this. These are not just different answers, they are different ways of seeing. Early Marxism trains our attention on exploitation, ideology, and distorted consciousness. Structuralism trains us to look for systems of meaning beneath what feels natural. Functionalism trains us to look for order, integration, and stability. Different lenses, different blind spots. Now, here's the key move. Up to now, we've mostly been hovering above the map. Big structures, big systems, big explanations. From next week onward, we start walking again. And we will walk inwards. Next week's session is on microsociology. Why microsociology matters. You'll see it described as anti-functionalism, and that label is doing important work. Because microsociology emerges as a reaction against exactly the kind of thinking we've just seen in Parsons. The move is simple, but radical. Stop starting with systems, stop starting with norms and functions, start with interaction. Not abstract actors, not roles floating in a system, but people doing things together. Talking, interpreting, adjusting, making sense of situations as they unfold. This is why Garfinkel famously says people are not cultural dopes. We are not passive carriers of norms, we actively produce social order. So when functionalism asks, how is order possible? Microsociology replies, order isn't given, it's accomplished. Moment by moment, day by day, interaction by interaction. That shift matters. How this connects back to this week, Mr. Microsociology doesn't come out of nowhere. In fact, it builds directly on tensions we've already seen. Structuralism told us that meaning is relational, that words and symbols only make sense within systems of difference. Symbolic interactionism takes that insight and asks, fine, but where does meaning actually happen? It happens in interaction, in conversations, in gestures, in situations where people constantly take the role of the other. Mead, Goffman, Garfinkel, not rejecting structure, but showing how structure is produced in practice. At the same time, microsociology is uneasy with functionalism, because if you start with order, you risk explaining it away. If you start with systems, you risk losing agency. If you start with norms, you risk forgetting interpretation. So next week, you'll see a deliberate methodological stance. Stay close to what people actually do. Be suspicious of explanations that move too quickly away from lived experience. Quick word of warning, and this is important. Microsociology is not being offered as the final word. It has limits. It can lose sight of power. It can struggle with inequality. It can find large-scale change hard to explain. Those problems will come back later, very explicitly, especially with Bourdieu, with Foucault, with feminist and post-colonial theory. So the aim next week, or any week for that matter, is not agreement. It's learning to see something we may not have noticed before. Looking ahead, week 15 moves us into microsociology. Week 16 then shifts sharply to rational choice and exchange. A very different actor emerges there. Not a meaning maker, not a cultural dope, but a calculator. Strategic, instrumental, choosing under constraints. Then in week 17 we return to Marxism, but reworked. Neo-Marxism brings culture, ideology and everyday life back into the analysis of power. From there, Foucault unsettles both structure and subject. Networks rethink society as relations rather than levels. Bourdieu tries to hold structure and practice together. Feminist and post-colonial theory ask who was missing all along. Nothing disappears, everything gets reworked. So, to close this week, Early Marxism teaches us to question a world that presents itself as inevitable. Structuralism teaches us to look beneath meanings that feel natural. Functionalism teaches us why order mattered so much in a particular historical moment. Next week, microsociology asks a different question. What if society isn't something that exists above us? What if it's something we do? In interaction, in talk, in everyday situations that feel small but aren't. That's where we go next.